The next time you find yourself embroiled in an argument with someone that's contentious and uncomfortable, say, your words will be, that you'll be straw manned. Your words will be taken out of context. The other person, and you too, will try to win instead of trying to solve the problem.
This conversation. Opportunity.
You don't give me anything. You don't have to give me. I asked you a question.
I asked you a question.
You wouldn't even answer
You
it.
didn't answer your own question.
Debate. It's a debate between us. You're in the audience. Audience comes from the Latin to listen.
Hey, bro, I ain't finished my sentence.
Nothing you're saying has anything to do with...
Well, you see, you encounter a situation like that very frequently. Everyone does in their life. And so now if you're talking to someone who is acting in opposition to you, institute the following rule. You don't get to respond to the person's claims until they've exhausted that particular claim, and this does presume to some degree that you're dealing with a good faith actor, even if they feel differently than you do.
I'm very glad I put you on the spot.
Well,
I'm very glad that I have exercised my freedom of speech.
You get my point. It's like you're doing what you should do, which is digging a bit to see what the hell's going on.
So
and that is what you should do. But you're exercising your freedom of speech to certainly risk offending me. And that's fine. I think more power to you as far as I'm concerned.
Except you haven't sat there and... I'm just trying to work that out. I mean...
Ha, gotcha.
You have got me.
You don't get to respond until you have recapitulated their viewpoint and summarized it in a manner they find acceptable. That's so treacherously sneaky, that rule. Because what it means is you have to demonstrate that you attended to what they say closely enough and carefully enough to, first of all, act out validation of the idea that they have an opinion worth attending to. That's a big deal, eh? People really like being paid attention to. There's nothing people like more than that.
To watch.
I know. I know what you said about... I know Candace.
I'm going to finish. La, la,
It's all right.
la.
You don't have to do that. It's fine. I know what it means.
La, la, la means be quiet and let me finish.
But you did interrupt my question.
So,
almost every heated argument starts when you stop listening or empathizing with the other person. So if you want to disagree with someone without it turning into a fight, the first step is to listen deeply and make the other person feel heard.
People really like being paid attention to. There's nothing people like more than that. When you listen to someone very, very carefully, and especially if they express themselves for a while, and you say to them, well...
Think I would trust anybody at this point in my life?
yeah, it's tough. It's tough. It's tough. I hear you.
I hear you. 3 powerful words, especially when someone is sharing a negative feeling.
When you've allowed people to be in your life that shouldn't be there, and then they do the thing you knew they were going to do, and you're screaming at them, but you really need to scream at yourself?
Yeah, so you realize anything that's like anger or frustration, that's something that's wrong with you that needs to be dealt with.
Yes.
Especially if they're happy to accept it, because that also means that you did listen to them. So you signified that they were worth attending to, and then you listened to them enough to actually understand what they were saying, to try to understand it, and then you did understand it. And then they're way happier with you, even if you're arguing with them, because at least now they know they can rely on you to be a reliable listener. And there's a part of them that would rather have that paid attention to than fail to pass, what would you say, to go unnoticed. Every cynic is entirely disappointed when his or her cynicism goes unchallenged, because there's a part of them, like a little unwarped part of their soul, that's still alive, thinking, oh my God, I hope someone calls me on all my foolishness and cynicism, because if they don't, that means that it's valid and generally applicable, and I'm in hell, and what good is that? So you're called upon to, first of all, summarize what they said, which is not an easy thing, right? Because it means you have to, and sometimes it's somewhat incoherent and emotion-laden, especially if it's in the course of an argument. So you have to sort of strike right to the quick. It sounds to me like this is the point you were making. And then you lay out the point, and then you see they have to be happy with your summary. They have to be pleased with it, which means that you're doing exactly the opposite of straw-manning the argument, quite the contrary. And you're doing them a favor in some sense by reducing it to the gist, because that's actually an incredibly complex cognitive operation. It's possible that during your contentious discussion, they will tell you something about how you're wrong that's accurate. Now, you're not going to be very happy about that, because, like, who wants to discover that they're wrong? But it's better to figure out that your map is inaccurate than it is to get lost. And so one of the things you have to remember when you're discussing things with people, even if they're out to defeat you, let's say, is that there is some glimmering of the possibility that you can walk away with more knowledge than you walked in with. And that can be worth paying quite a price for. And so, like, it's very hard to listen to you. I mean, it's very hard to attend to you.
Because
you rattle on with your ideological speech.
It's not ideological.
Most people's arguments are unbelievably shallow. They're not arguments, they're just perceptual biases. That's one way of thinking about them. And if you get people to delineate out the space in any rigorous manner, then their attitudes shift.
Where'd you start? Current affair, right?
No, wrong.
Well, you faked a lot. I got dirt on you, doggy.
Cameron,
I'm gonna get at you in a minute.
What you really want, if you're going to engage in a discussion about, say, something like gun control, is you want to be familiar with the entire range of arguments, deeply familiar, and have some respect for them. It's pretty clear that guns kill people. They're dangerous. But then it's also not self-evident that the only entities that should be allowed to be dangerous are the state entities. So there's things that can be said that are intelligent across that entire line of that entire distribution of opinion. And if you're educated, then you should be conversant with the entire range of opinions. That on any complex subject, there's a lot to be said. And that, you're going to come at that with your particular ideological bias, let's say your temperamental bias. Maybe even you might even come up at it with things you've actually thought about, although that's pretty damn rare. But you need to learn just exactly how localized your viewpoint is.
I've got to stop, guys. Look, there's too many of you.
Okay, one simple question.
Here's another thing I could tell you that if you take to heart will save you an awful lot of grief and misery. If you're talking to someone and they're not listening, shut up. Just stop. If they're not listening, quit saying words. You'll just feel like a fool anyways. It's like you're throwing ping pong balls against a brick wall. You're not getting anywhere. If they're not listening, that's a sign that the situation isn't set up to allow you to progress on the path that you're choosing. And so then you have to stop and you think, okay, well, what's going on here? Why is the person not listening? Am I being too forceful? Do they not understand what I'm saying? Is it too much about me? Do they want to talk? What's going on? Maybe they don't want to be here. There's all sorts of possibilities, but that's when you have to wake up past what it is that you're trying to impose on the situation and explore and see what's there. And that's way more interesting than trying to impose your viewpoint. But it's very interesting to talk to people who radically differ because they'll tell you things that you haven't considered. That doesn't mean you have to agree with them, but it's much more informative to walk away from a conversation having learned something that you didn't know than it is having won the stupid argument which you can't win anyways. Well, you had to let people talk to find out what they thought. It's associated with this capacity and necessity to listen deeply. They're flip sides of the same coin, to use a terrible cliche. And so that's why free speech is not just another freedom or right among many. It's certainly not viewpoint diversity or anything like that. It's the mechanism by which we generate the conceptions that allow us to organize our experience in the world. It's that mechanism. And more than that, it's the mechanism that allows us to reformulate and criticize those conceptions when they've become outdated and sterile, to dissolve them into a chaos that we have to contend with while it's occurring, and then to reanimate them in a new form so that we can move into the future.